This is First Contact, Stories of the Call Center.
Let's talk about, the legalities of illegal calls versus legal calls. When we talk about the word robocall, right? Everyone says robocall is a bad word. I mean, you just hear it's like, oh, no, I don't do robocalls. But when you go back to it and you look at robocalls, there's a lot of calls that fall into the bucket of robocalls, a lot that we actually rely on. So can you give us some insight into your understanding of, hey, what are these legal robocalls that somehow everyone feels doesn't exist, that are very important?
Yeah, here's what's interesting is we try to use technology such as stir shaken, and you'll hear statements that, oh, this will eliminate illegal robocalls. I'm sorry. That is so far from the truth. The reality is that the legality of the call is determined outside of this framework. You have to look at the FCC's TCPA, the FTC's TSR, and then let's throw in some rules from the CFPB. Let's throw in some state rules on top of that. And legal calls is all about the consent. There are some other elements that are associated with it, but mostly it comes down to consent to deliver the call. That is something the carriers don't have visibility into. That is something stir, shake, and solution providers don't have visibility into. So that's really what determines that a call is legal or illegal. It's about that consent. So I still think that we're falling short with regards to stir shaken on the ability to distinguish between legal or illegal. I can be a legal entity and I can have a set of numbers to call, and I could blast everybody and I could look like I'm legit, but if I don't have consent, that's an illegal call. And that's still a challenge to get that type of information into this trust framework. And to your point on some of these calls, I think consumers, when I look at the messages or the complaints that are delivered, they're not aware that maybe they signed up for or provided consent. So this entity who's delivering the call could very well believe, well, we have consent, this is legal, but the consumer doesn't feel like it was a legal call because they don't recall providing that consent. So a lot of things get caught up in that space. It's more difficult to determine those, but what we can all agree upon are the IRS scam calls, the Social Security number calls. There are some that are just pure fraud all day long, and those need to be stopped. So how do we distinguish between the two? One of the key elements is, those fraudsters on the Social Security number scams, they're not going to reveal themselves. They're not going to go through a vetting. They're going to hide. So that's our only potential, is to maybe really truly eliminate the fraud, but then we're going to enter this new space of legal entities communicating with consumers that just don't want to be communicated with. I don't know what the world looks like for call centers once we get to that point. We'll just have to be aware of, hearing the consumer's voice at that point.